When I first heard Laura's story, it began with a description that piqued my curiosity immediately: an old woman on a weathered porch, staring out at the world like it owed her an apology. Everyone in the small town knew Mary. She was a fixture in their lives, almost as constant as the sunrise. But unlike the sunrise, her presence wasn't something they eagerly awaited. She hated everything, Laura said, shaking her head but smiling at the memory. The way someone parked their car too close to the corner. The kids playing with their bikes on the street. Even the birds, can you believe that? She complained about the birds being too loud in the mornings. I'd never met anyone like her. I leaned forward slightly, sensing that there was more to this tale than a portrait of a cranky old woman. So what made you approach her? Laura's smile grew wider, though it carried a hint of mischief. I guess you could say I was curious. Or maybe a little stubborn. I just moved to town and didn't know anyone. People warned me about her. Don't get on Mary's bad side, they said. But I thought, well, everyone deserves a chance, right? Mary had been sitting in her usual spot that day, hands resting on the wooden armrests of her chair, her expression set in its default scowl. The air seemed thick with her disapproval. Laura, new to town and radiating optimism, had decided to test the waters. I just walked right up to her and said, "Hi. I'm Laura. I just moved into the yellow house on Maple Street." She didn't even look at me at first. Just stared straight ahead like I wasn't even there. Laura paused for a moment, clearly savoring the memory. Then she said, "Your mailbox is crooked." I couldn't help but laugh. I told her, "Well, I'll have to fix that, then." And you know what she said next? "You should have done it before you moved in." That's when I knew I had to keep talking to her. There was something, I don't know, fascinating about her. Like she wanted people to push her away, but deep down, she didn't want to be left alone. Laura's decision to keep engaging with Mary wasn't just an act of defiance against the town's warnings. It was an act of kindness, one that Mary wasn't used to. Laura didn't back away from the gruff exterior, and instead of being offended, she found it amusing. I asked her if she wanted to go for a walk. Just out of the blue. She gave me this look, like I'd suggested something scandalous. But after a minute, she stood up, grabbed her cane, and said, "Fine. But don't talk too much." Laura chuckled softly, her eyes lighting up as she relived the moment. So there we were, walking down the street. And I just started talking. About everything. How beautiful the trees were. How nice it was to live in such a peaceful town. How excited I was to decorate my new house. She didn't say much at first, just grunted or made these little noises. But I could tell she was listening. "What made you so sure?" Her pace slowed down, Laura said simply. And her face changed, just a little. Less scowling, more curious, I guess. Like she wasn't used to someone pointing out the good stuff. Maybe no one had done that for her in a long time. Laura's words hung in the air for a moment, and I could feel the weight of what she had said. Sometimes, the simplest gestures, an invitation, a conversation, a moment of shared space, can begin to unravel years of isolation. "Do you think she liked you right away?" Laura laughed again, the kind of laugh that held no bitterness, only warmth. "Oh, definitely not. I think I annoyed her at first. But I wasn't trying to make her like me. I just wanted her to know she wasn't invisible. People can forget you exist if all you ever do is push them away. I wanted her to see that someone noticed her, even if she didn't make it easy." Her words were a reminder, not just of Mary's story, but of something bigger. It's easy to dismiss the difficult people in our lives, to walk past them and write them off. But what if we didn't? What if we chose to engage, even when it's uncomfortable? The second walk was not planned. Laura had just finished painting her mailbox, straightening it in the process, and decided to take a stroll through her new neighborhood. She hadn't expected to see Mary again so soon, but there she was, sitting on her porch in her usual spot, eyes scanning the world for faults like a hawk on patrol. Laura waved, unsure if Mary would even notice, but the older woman lifted her chin slightly in acknowledgement. Encouraged, Laura crossed the street. "Looks like you've been busy," Mary said as soon as Laura was within earshot. "I figured I'd better fix it before you pointed it out again." Mary's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Almost. Took you long enough." Laura took that as an invitation to linger, leaning casually against the fence. "I was heading for a walk. Want to come along?" Mary hesitated, her hands resting on the arms of her chair. It was a small pause, but Laura noticed it, the slightest crack in the wall Mary had built around herself. Without waiting for a response, Laura added, "I saw some flowers blooming by the creek yesterday. They're beautiful, but I don't know what they're called." "You probably know." Mary scoffed, but she was already reaching for her cane. "You think I know everything, don't you?" "I think you know more than you let on." They walked slowly, Laura matching Mary's deliberate pace. The air was warm, filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and wildflowers. Laura talked about her progress with the house, how she was trying to make it feel like home, how she hoped to plant a little garden in the backyard. Mary's responses were brief and mostly critical. Gardens were too much work. Paint colors never looked the same once they dried. But there was something different in her tone this time. Less biting, more engaged. When they reached the creek, Laura pointed to the patch of flowers she'd mentioned. Delicate purple blossoms swayed gently in the breeze, their vibrant color standing out against the green of the grass. "Those are wild phlox," Mary said, leaning slightly on her cane as she surveyed the scene. "They grow anywhere if you let them. People think they're weeds, but they're tougher than they look. They're beautiful." "They're persistent," Mary corrected. "That's not the same thing." Laura crouched down to get a closer look at the flowers, her fingers brushing the soft petals. "Maybe not. But sometimes persistence is its own kind of beauty, don't you think?" Mary didn't answer right away. Her gaze was fixed on the flowers, but her thoughts seemed far away, her expression softened by something Laura couldn't quite place. For a moment it was as if the creek and the flowers and the warm breeze had transported her somewhere else. "They remind me of my sister," Mary said finally. Her voice was quieter now, almost reflective. "She used to pick wildflowers like these and make the ugliest bouquets you've ever seen. Every time she brought one home, my mother would say, 'What am I supposed to do with this mess?' But my sister didn't care. She'd just laugh and put them in a jar on the windowsill anyway." Laura stayed quiet, sensing that this was a rare moment of openness. She didn't want to interrupt whatever memory Mary was allowing herself to relive. "She died when she was 20, Mary continued. "Car accident. My parents never got over it. And me. I guess I stopped caring about things that didn't matter. Flowers. Neighbors. All the little stuff people fuss over." Laura stood up slowly, brushing dirt off her hands. "I'm sorry, Mary." Mary straightened, her grip tightening on her cane. "Don't be. Life doesn't give you time to feel sorry for yourself. You just keep going." "That's what I did." They started back toward the neighborhood, the silence between them heavier now but not uncomfortable. It felt like an understanding had passed between them, a bridge built over the creek and the wildflowers. "You know," Laura said as they reached Mary's porch, "I don't think your sister's bouquets were ugly. I think they were probably perfect." Mary paused on the first step, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Laura. "You're too sentimental for your own good, you know that." "Maybe. But I think you needed someone sentimental to walk with today." Mary didn't argue. She didn't agree either. But as Laura turned to leave, she thought she saw Mary's lips twitch again, that almost smile flickering briefly before disappearing. The neighbors started noticing the change in Mary before Laura did. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small differences, barely perceptible unless you were paying close attention. Her usual cutting remarks softened, tinged with a wry humor that made people smile instead of flinch. She still grumbled, but now it felt more like a habit than genuine discontent. "I think she's warming up to you," a woman from down the street told Laura one afternoon. Laura laughed at the comment but didn't respond. She wasn't sure if "warming up" was the right phrase. Mary wasn't the type to gush or offer compliments, but their walks had become a routine. Almost every afternoon, Laura would find herself drawn to that familiar porch, and Mary, like clockwork, would grumble about how young people had no sense of time before joining her anyway. One day, as they walked past the small park near the edge of town, Laura noticed something unusual. Mary stopped, her gaze fixed on a group of children playing near the swings. A boy was running after a girl, his laughter ringing out as she squealed and darted away. "They remind me of my boys," Mary said, her voice quieter than usual. Laura turned to her, surprised. "You had boys?" "Two," Mary replied, her eyes still on the children. "Evan and Peter. They were always up to something. Climbing trees, building forts. Drove me mad most days." Laura waited, sensing that Mary had more to say. "Evan was the older one. So serious, always looking out for his little brother. And Peter. Peter was trouble from the start. He had this laugh." Mary's voice faltered, and she took a deep breath before continuing. "They grew up fast. Too fast, really. Evan went off to college, and Peter, well, he didn't make it that far." Laura's stomach tightened at the weight of Mary's words, but she didn't press. "Car accident," Mary said after a moment, her tone matter-of-fact. "He was 19. Same age as my sister when she died. Can you imagine losing two people that young?" It felt like some kind of cruel joke. Laura's heart ached for her, but she knew better than to offer hollow reassurances. Instead, she placed a hand gently on Mary's arm, a simple gesture that seemed to say, "I'm here." For a while, they stood in silence, the distant sound of children's laughter filling the air. Finally, Mary straightened, her usual sharpness returning. "Anyway, no point dwelling on it. Life moves on, whether you want it to or not." They resumed their walk, but Laura couldn't stop thinking about what Mary had shared. It was as if, piece by piece, Mary was allowing her past to surface, revealing the pain and loss that had shaped her into the person she was. Later that evening, Laura found herself sitting by her window, staring out at the quiet street. Mary's words lingered in her mind, and she wondered how many others carried stories like hers, stories buried beneath layers of sarcasm or bitterness, hidden from view until someone took the time to listen. A week later, Mary did something that stunned the entire neighborhood. She volunteered to help with the community garden project. It started with Laura casually mentioning it during one of their walks. "The town's hosting a gardening day this weekend. They're looking for volunteers to spruce up the flower beds near the library. I was thinking of going. You should come with me." Mary snorted. "Me? In a garden? I don't even like flowers." "You liked the wild phlox by the creek," Laura reminded her with a grin. Mary didn't respond, but Laura caught the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. That Saturday morning, as the volunteers gathered near the library, Laura was shocked to see Mary walking up the path, her cane tapping against the pavement. She wore an old sun hat that looked like it hadn't been used in years and carried a pair of gardening gloves tucked under her arm. "Don't make a big deal out of it," Mary muttered as she approached Laura. "I'm just here to make sure you don't ruin anything." Laura bit back a laugh. "Of course. Your expertise is much appreciated." The other volunteers stared as Mary joined the group, whispering amongst themselves. No one could remember the last time Mary had participated in anything remotely social, let alone something that involved dirt and flowers. True to form, Mary grumbled her way through the morning. She complained about the heat, the poor quality of the tools, and the way someone had planted marigolds too close together. But as the hours passed, something changed. Laura noticed it first when Mary knelt to help a young boy plant a row of tulip bulbs. She showed him how deep to dig the hole, her usually sharp tone softening as she explained why the bulbs needed to be spaced apart. The boy listened intently, nodding as if Mary's instructions were the most important thing he'd ever heard. "You've got a knack for this," Laura said quietly when the boy ran off to show his mother his work. Mary shook her head. "It's just planting flowers. Nothing special." "I think he'd disagree." Mary didn't respond, but Laura saw the way her expression shifted, her usual scowl replaced by something gentler. By the end of the day, the garden looked beautiful. Rows of vibrant flowers lined the pathway, their colors bright against the soft mulch. The volunteers gathered for a photo, laughing and admiring their handiwork. Mary stood off to the side, her hands resting on her cane as she surveyed the scene. For a moment, Laura thought she would leave before the photo was taken, but then Mary stepped forward, standing stiffly at the edge of the group. "Smile, Mary," someone called out. To everyone's surprise, she did. Later, as they walked back home, Laura glanced at Mary, who was uncharacteristically quiet. "You had fun, didn't you?" Mary rolled her eyes, but there was no denying the faint blush on her cheeks. "Don't push your luck." Laura laughed, her heart full as she watched Mary walk up the steps to her porch. She knew it wasn't just the flowers that had bloomed that day, it was something much deeper. A few weeks after the gardening project, Laura noticed something surprising. The small porch that had always been Mary's fortress, a place where she sat, glaring out at the world, had undergone a transformation. The usual clutter of empty flower pots and a faded doormat had been replaced by a row of fresh potted plants. Geraniums, marigolds, and even a cheerful yellow daisy sat neatly arranged in a line, their blooms bright against the aged wood. Laura stood at the bottom of the steps, her mouth curving into a smile. "Who are you, and what have you done with Mary?" Mary was sitting in her usual chair, wearing the same sun hat she'd brought to the gardening project. She didn't look up immediately, but Laura caught the faintest twitch of her lips. "Don't get used to it. I just figured if people are going to walk past this house every day, they might as well have something decent to look at." Laura climbed the steps and inspected the flowers. "They're beautiful. You did a great job." Mary adjusted her hat, her tone laced with mock irritation. "Of course I did. What kind of fool do you take me for?" Laura laughed, sitting down on the edge of the porch. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet hum of the neighborhood buzzed around them, the distant chatter of children playing, the occasional bark of a dog, the sound of wind brushing through the trees. "You've changed, Mary." Mary gave her a sidelong glance. "Don't get sentimental on me, girl. I'm still me." "You are. But I think you're starting to let people in, and that's a good thing." Mary leaned back in her chair, her hands folded over the top of her cane. For a long time, she didn't say anything. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, less guarded. "You know, when you get to my age, you start thinking about how people are going to remember you. I spent so much time being angry at the world that I didn't leave much for anyone to remember fondly. Then you came along with your ridiculous optimism, and I thought, well, if she can be happy, maybe it wouldn't kill me to try." Laura felt a lump form in her throat, but she swallowed it down. "I think people will remember you for more than just being angry. You've got a good heart, Mary. It's just been buried under a lot of hurt." Mary looked at her, and for the first time, Laura saw tears glistening in the older woman's eyes. Mary blinked quickly, shaking her head as if to dismiss the moment. "Enough of this. If you're going to hang around here, at least make yourself useful and water those plants. They're not going to keep themselves alive." Laura grinned, hopping up to grab the watering can from the side of the porch. "Yes, ma'am. Whatever you say." As Laura watered the plants, she felt a sense of warmth that she hadn't expected. Watching Mary tend to her flowers, grumble at the world, and yet still allow small moments of joy to creep in, she realized something important: Mary wasn't just softening. She was healing. Later that day, as Laura walked home, she couldn't stop thinking about how far Mary had come. It wasn't just about the flowers or the smiles or the moments of humor. It was about the way Mary had started to let life back in, one small piece at a time. If you've ever seen someone make a change like that, you'll know how powerful it can be. It's a reminder that it's never too late to start over, to grow, to find joy in unexpected places. If you've got a story like that, I'd love to hear it. Sometimes, sharing those moments can help others believe that change is possible for them too.